Springtime, a time of pretty flowers, buzzing bees, chirping birdies, and oh yeah, one more thing. A deadly disease that moves with face-kicking speed, contaminating everything in its path, including our town.
You don't have to be a math genius to figure out that the chance I had of getting Miss Fingerwood to like me was about 950 million to 1.
Welcome to Splat Attack, a 90s podcast overflowing into the slime-filled past. I'm your lovesick older brother, Brett.
And I'm your lovesick, contaminated little brother, Alex. And Brett.
Yes, Alex?
What are we doing in Wellsville for Valentine's Day today?
Well, Alex, this is an episode battle I've been dying to do to round out the Pete and Pete episode battle trilogy we've got going on. First we did a summer one, and then we did one for fall with back to school, and now we're back for spring practically, or at least Valentine's Day.
And considering Wellsville is one of our most favorite places to visit, we don't mind being back here for a third time. But just to clarify, no, we're not doing just Pete and Pete for this particular show format. Later this season, we'll be applying this same episode battle to another live-action Nickelodeon show, along with Nicktoons to see how it handles. So if you want more variety with this type of episode this episode format, hang tight. We'll get there.
Indeed, yeah. We also did an episode review of New Year's Pete way back in season 1, episode 12. And we have intentions to apply Pete and Pete to more of our show formats as the podcast keeps chugging along, including a retrospective since we missed the 30th anniversary. So don't be dismayed. Definitely look out for that in the coming seasons, because we're always just trying out different formats of different shows to provide the maximum amount of variety as possible for all you Slimesters.
Who is going to be joining us?
Well, I think... since we're in the middle of the street in our typical Wellsville suburban block, I think I see them approaching us now in the distance, and it looks like they're wearing one of those yellow hazmat suits that I also saw in New Year's Pete's. No doubt to protect them from all the love sickness that's going around. Let me see who's through that plastic visor.
Crosswind. So I'll get it.
Oh, wow. It's Allie. Wow. Welcome back to Wellsville, Allie. How you doing? It's been a hot minute.
Well, chirpity chee.
Yes.
Good
indeed.
to be back. I feel like Ned Flanders when I say that. Hi, diddly ho there, neighborinos.
I'm pretty sure Eunice Puel is from the Ned Flanders family tree.
Yeah, she
some
must
extended
be. Yes.
branch.
It's good to be back. I'm very glad and honored to be back in Wellsville as well. I even have my blowholes t-shirt.
Oh, awesome.
Nice.
Yeah.
Where'd you get that?
I made it myself. It's on my Krebstar Industries Instagram. You can get one yourself if you want one.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. I always love seeing what kind of Krebs products you come up with on your Instagram page, Ellie. It's just a ton of fun.
Yeah, thank you. I have a blast with it. And I'm excited to get back into it for this year. We're now 30 years away from season 1, technically,
so
right? So,
yeah.
So I'm excited for the year to come in 2023.
Well, I hope you brought your love gun and plenty of anti-love repellent, because it's time for us to suit up and defend our episodes. So let the battle begin. We have already established that, yes, we're going to be doing 2 Pete and Pete episodes today, and Allie is going to be our amazing judge. So, Brett, what episode will you be defending?
I will be defending Valentine's Day Massacre with the little sword emblem over there on the offense. And what are you going to be defending, Alex?
I am going to be defending Crisis in the Love Zone by The Shield in one of these corners.
On Pete's
one.
face.
Yeah, right here.
Yeah, to hide his disgruntled expression. It's too hideous. Oh, I think I'm getting the love sickness now.
Well, before we go into our categories and what all we're going to be talking about, Brett, give us some of the descriptions of your episode. When did it come out and all that jazz?
Yeah, this is an interesting one because we briefly touched upon it at the end of our previous episode, Favorite Nick Pilots. And it is season 0, or, the specials era before they get into the first season, technically. And it's episode 1. So it's like the first of the 5 specials. And its original air date is February 9th, 1991, directed by the great Catherine Diekman, and written by Will McRobb.
And Crisis in the Love Zone. This was from season 3, episode 6. This aired on March 23rd, 1996. Also directed by Catherine Diekman. Also written by Will McRobb. But also you have David Hemmingson and M.F. Stern. And Allie, would you mind running through the categories that we are going to be focusing on for this episode battle?
Absolutely. Yeah, we got 2 love-centered episodes here today. And so you will be arguing first our story. I love, what is the better story of these 2? We're also highlighting a main character from each episode. We'll be talking, of course, the citizens of Wellsville, who are so important to the show itself. The last 2 categories, use of the love theme we have going on. How well did your episode use that intended theme? And last category should be the most interesting one. Why is your Pete more lovesick? Because you each get a Pete that is in their own world of love.
That is very true, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how we defend their condition for their episode. Well, take it away, Allie. I think we're ready to begin and duke it out with our weapons of war.
Well, cool. I think it makes sense to start with story, and I think what I'm looking for in this category, you're going to be discussing a lot of love subjects. So I think for the best judgment of this category, simply, why is your episode the better of story in general?
I guess I will begin, since my episode is first, chronologically. So Valentine's Day Massacre, I think, is a really classic kind of tale of a kid falling in love with their teacher. But it doesn't just boil down to that. There's a lot more layers involved, especially with how friendship dynamics and relations to other characters that we see a lot featured in this episode in particular change. So what happens, how this ball gets rolling through the plot, is that when Big Pete accidentally kills the school mascot with a miscalculated discus throw on the school football field, he, Ellen, and Little Pete must keep the unfortunate murder a secret from the school groundskeeper, who is Mr. Beverly. Meanwhile, Big Pete develops a crush on his math teacher, who's Mrs. Fingerwood, and it causes tensions to rise between him and Ellen, while also attracting the attention of a local bully for the episode who's named Openface and his posse to blackmail Big Pete to obtain the fighting squid and command the student body with it. So through a roller coaster of romantic feelings, Big Pete must grapple with who he cares about more, his teacher or his best friend. It's very delicate balance here. And it all comes down to a heartfelt head when Big Pete faces Openface on the 50-yard line on the football field, where he actually admits to his wrongdoing from the beginning of the episode that started the whole mess. And surprisingly, he was vindicated from his guilt. Mr. Beverly forgave him, and somehow through the process he fell in love with Mrs. Fingerwood, and then when he actually had time to spend with Mrs. Fingerwood, in the classroom together, he realized that maybe she's not exactly chalked up to what he had of the idea of her in his mind. She's really into math, and he isn't quite so much, but he tries to, get on her level. And, that really makes him question his relationship with Ellen in this episode, because we don't really see any romantic feelings built up between them, not quite yet anyways. We see more evidence of that later in the series, but here it's just the test of a true friendship and what happens when a woman gets in the middle of it. So there's a lot of hurt feelings here, and Ellen ends up being manipulated by Open Face so that she can spill the beans to him on the secret that her, Big Pete, and Little Pete are kind of keeping to themselves in regards to the squid. And Open Face is just kind of out for himself, and this is just a big scheme to gain control over other people at school. Luckily, it doesn't go through, and by Pete being bold enough to admit his fault, he's forgiven, and things just kind of iron themselves out. Big Pete is back with Ellen. Mrs. Fingerwood takes an interest in Mr. Beverly, especially after he shows her that beautiful, well-calculated display of a heart being painted on the football field right at the 50-yard line. And they get a nice little plaque for Edna, and they pay their respects to the Fighting Squid school mascot. So it's a very sweet, charming episode. Has some classic tropes in it with bullying and crushes on teachers and all. And I just really love how it sets the stage for Pete and Pete to come, because we see a lot of the quirkiness that we know and love from Wellsville that's evident in the character interactions here.
Alex, I'd love to hear your argument, and then I might have a follow-up question here.
All right. Well, for Crisis in the Love Zone, it's essentially a giant Twitter-pated episode, as they say on Bambi. The episode, we're not going to get too much into characters themselves just yet, but the main thing is it's spring fever, and Nona and Little Pete are actively trying to stay away because everyone in Wellsville is getting affected by spring fever. We see all kinds of couples getting together, and it's gross. I mean, they take the romance to a level 11, wiping the milk off of somebody else's mustache and things like that. But everyone's affected by it. Even the characters who normally wouldn't see and love are affected by this. So Little Pete's trying to stay away. Little Pete gets contaminated. And the main episode focuses, there's an A story and a B story. The A story focuses on Nona and Little Pete, where she is trying to constantly find a way to break Little Pete from spring fever. And the B story is Big Pete trying to get in on, probably outside of Nona, the only other character who is not affected by spring fever, Heather, over at the tennis courts. And he is fawning over her, and she wants nothing to do with him. Quite literally tells him, quit breathing my air. And he's trying to have Ellen help overshoot the tennis ball, so he has to go get it and bring it to her. And for a good chunk of the episode, these two stories are going their own different directions. And then during the second half of the episode, they very much cross over, where now Nona has to go to Big Pete to get his assistance to break Little Pete from being contaminated. But he himself is contaminated, so that's not going to work. And Ellen ends up falling for Big Pete, and she writes a love note, and she has it mailed to the Wrigley's home, but Little Pete thinks it's his, which is from who he's been infected by, the mail carrier. Our second mail carrier romance episode. But now he thinks that she's the one who wrote the love note, and now he's going to respond back. And Big Pete ends up... Ellen is upset with Big Pete because he didn't get the letter, but she doesn't know that. She just thinks he's ignoring her. So she hits the tennis ball so far he has to run through every person that we see in this episode to get to the tennis ball, jumps off of a hill and hits his head. And at the end of the episode, Little Pete is professing his undying love to the mail carrier. Nona stops him, tackles him quite literally, and hits his head on the pavement. And now he's gone. Nona ends up becoming contaminated, which is why she tackled him in the first place, which still leaves Heather as the only character not to be affected by spring fever. And now that little Pete is out of his spring fever days, he gives the love letter back to the mail carrier, and she notices that the E on it is not her initial or not her handwriting, so she gives it back to Ellen, saying, I gave this to the wrong person. And Ellen is now in the hospital by the bedside of where Big Pete is, and she realizes what's happened. And then by the end of the episode, spring fever has now passed. Everyone goes back to their normal routine. But there for a while, almost everyone was affected, and the reason I would say my episode is a better written one is because whereas the Valentine's Day Massacre very much focuses on Big Pete, Little Pete's there, but he's kind of there. Whereas this one, they're both in there, and they're both pretty well. They have a lot of screen time, and they have their own two separate stories. But near the end, they both intermingle, and they both end each other's stories, which I think is a tricky thing to do for Pete and Pete. Because a lot of times you have one story that's pretty prominent, the other one that's kind of there. This one's probably one of the better ones that has two separate stories that intertwine into one. But that's my opinion. But that is the main plot for Crisis in the Love Zone.
I noticed a common theme you guys brought up in that there is another girl that is interacting with Ellen's love for Pete, Big Pete. Yep. There's some similarities there. So I have a follow-up question for our story, in that for someone who's being introduced to the show, why would your episode be a better representation of the series itself?
One, you get a lot of the family banter. You don't really get to see Pete and Big Pete interact very much, but you get their own very, very distinct personalities very clearly. You see that Little Pete is very against. He's very much a rebel, and Big Pete is much more the romanticist. You see the relationships they have with their friends. Big Pete with Ellen, how there has very much always been that on again, off again, but it really works here because he's always seen her as your girl, your friend, but you're not my girlfriend, and that's still very prevalent here. And also Little Pete very much has kind of not throughout the run of the show. I think this is the only episode where Nona and Little Pete really show, either one of them show any real romantic affections for the other one, although Michelle Trachtenberg did say that she had a crush on Danny Tamborelli when she was a kid. But they've got that really solid camaraderie where she's kind of filling in for Artie. He's got some actual kids his age now to hang out with, and I think she's a good counterpart to Little Pete. And you still have the wide array of the Wellsville citizens, which we'll get into later, and you still have those really weird oddities that you normally see for Pete and Pete, like using the turtle as a key to find a secret stash of VHS tapes in the middle of the woods. Just a lot of those weird, odd things that you normally come to expect, and the close-ups and the fun angles that they use to show all the extremes. There you go. That's pretty much what I've got. And I think it's taken the Pete and Pete formula. It's had 3 seasons to do this, and it's really perfected it. Whereas the Valentine's Day Massacre, not to say it was bad, because it's not bad at all. It's quite good. But it was their first special, and it was the first time that they're really tinkering with a lot of these ideas. So it's trying to flesh it out, but it's not as well fleshed out as season 3.
I mean, I have a personal affection for this episode because it was one of the earliest ones I've seen as a kid growing up watching Nickelodeon, and rightfully so because it's the first official episode. Yeah. I really love the tone that it sets. Like, it feels epic, but also manageable for a kid who's dealing with love, especially in like the middle school age range, because Big Pete is a few years younger here. I believe he's like 4 or 5 years younger here than in Crisis in the Love Zone. So he's experiencing love, at least as far as I know, for the first time outside of his on again, off again feelings for Ellen. So I think a lot of people can relate to this experience when they're going through school and kind of figuring out things like crushes or, you know, why they like certain people and how to follow through with that based on like doing nice gestures like Valentine's, as we see here with Big Pete, or if, you know, they need something a little more grandiose to kind of get the message across that you like another person. So I really love how that thread is like interwoven through here while also establishing just the fun, quirky, alternative suburban nature of the show right from the get-go. Like even though Crisis in the Love Zone is a more refined episode in terms of all the elements coming together at key moments, at least here it's rough, but it's still got that charm, and all the pieces are in place where they need to be. You got the bully characters with their goofy names like Open Face and of course all of his minions. You have like the adult character who's kind of weird and has his own quirks, like painting wobbly lines when he gets overly stressed. You have Mrs. Fingerwood, who just is totally obsessed with math, draws her twos like a funny way, and is really interested about calculations of all sorts of things. So it's like a first time peering into the universe, and I feel like for people who like offbeat types of entertainment, this is a great gateway into the Pete and Pete universe, because it doesn't hit you straight on the head, but it gives you a very solid taste of what's to come from here with the dynamic of the two brothers. We can see that there's a big Pete and a little Pete, and they've got their own personalities, and occasionally they play off of each other. You got Ellen, who's kind of unifying them as a trio. You got the villains, you got the adult characters who come into it, and you got this seemingly normal plot that somehow gets a little bit weirder and stranger the further we go into it, but it also takes us through a roller coaster that ends us up on a side at the end, where everything just feels like it's tied up with a bow. Everything feels good, and you want to go back for more. And I certainly did too when I first saw this episode. So I think it's required viewing for first-time viewers who are interested in the Pete and Pete Wellsville universe.
All right, cool. Well, let's go to category 2, and you're each going to defend your main character and their role in this story.
So as I touched upon before through the story, Big Pete is the focus of this episode. He opens it right from the get-go with a narration with some epic fanfare on the football field of school. He's really kind of recounting all these events that happened and walking us through his journey of falling in and out in love with Mrs. Fingerwood, his teacher, but also learning how to handle and own up to his mistakes as he has to answer to Mr. Beverly, who is responsible for Edna the Fighting Squid mascot. I really appreciate his courage through making a lot of tough decisions in this episode. He may seem timid at first, like he seems rather introverted and even mumbling a little bit when he first opens his narration, but I like that he's setting forth from the get-go that he's the person who typically tells the Pete and Pete stories, save for like 1 or 2 episodes where little Pete takes the helm, like in Alex's episode. We also see him, how he interacts in a school environment compared to like his home or just like downtown or in another location where we see more kids present. And aside from like kids being in the classroom briefly for a couple of scenes, we mostly see him interact with his best friend Ellen and his little brother, little Pete, and how they work together to, you know, I guess guard the secret of accidentally murdering Edna and not really knowing how to do with it. And I appreciate that they respect the bond of friendship to the point where even when Open Face is trying to manipulate Ellen to spill the beans or tell the secret, which could possibly get him even more trouble, he chooses to, you know, stand up for it and own his mistakes, which is a sign of maturity. Certainly it was in my family growing up. In terms of falling in love, his main focus really is Mrs. Fingerwood. You know, he kind of swoons over her, really picks on things to appreciate about her in the classroom, like her drawing her twos a certain way and figuring out certain like velocities. Like I think they mentioned the formula of like how the distance to the sun. I can't quite remember exactly, but I can find him very relatable, and I've always found Big Pete relatable in the Pete and Pete episodes, because somehow his level of struggles and how to deal with him really resonate with me in terms of falling back on my siblings, because I also have a younger brother who I used to be close with, still am, but a little bit less so, and also best friends too for advice. Like if you're dealing with a problem, you don't have to deal with it on your own, and I admire Big Pete's willingness to reach out to others for help when you have a tricky situation you're not sure how to handle. So I think despite this being an episode where we see him younger, he demonstrates a lot of maturity here, and he doesn't let being fazed by he doesn't let his infatuation become a full-blown obsession too much. Like the most he does is make a pretty Valentine for it and just kind of swoons over Mrs. Finger a little bit, but it doesn't get like out of control like you would expect it to be, which I appreciate.
Alrighty, Alex.
So I'm going to give a very different answer, because I don't think Little Pete is the main protagonist of this episode, which I know is probably the easy thing to say because you see so much of Big Pete in the other one. I want to say that Nona is the main character because she's the one who carries this episode, and we follow her narrative, which is a way that really, again, intermingles the stories so well. We follow her all the way through with trying to stay with Little Pete so he doesn't get infected, and the other way around. And then when he does become infected by spring fever, she goes on this quest to get these VHS tapes that are lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3, or Love Con 1, Love Con 2, Love Con 3, where she is trying to listen to these pre-recorded messages from Little Pete of what to do in the event that he gets taken by this disease. And her loyalty is unlike anything I've ever seen in Pete and Pete. She goes above and beyond what anyone has really done outside of what Pete and Pete have done for each other. And she goes to everyone. She goes to Pit Stain. She goes to Big Pete. She gets the turtle and uses him to unlock the door. She goes to Ellen. Ellen and Big Pete are kind of the same. Mostly it's Big Pete. But by the end of it, she knows that he's going to be taken by this, and there's nothing that she can do. And Little Pete reminds her, just remember me as the way I was before all this. And then that's when she falls in love with him, because she has always cared for him. She's always liked him. She loves that friendship, and now spring fever has gotten her, and she loves Little Pete the way he was, not the way he's affected now. And I believe she's the only character, and I think it's the only time in the series, I think so, when anyone's ever said I love you.
Yeah.
Because they were all afraid. Little Pete was afraid to say those 3 words, so much so that he even put it on a board that he didn't want to say it out loud. And Nona was the one. And just before Little Pete said it, she tackled him and was professing her love for him. I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you, which is, it's very sweet. It's kind of cute.
Yeah.
It's really adorable. Probably the most adorable thing of the episode. Watching Big Pete just fawning over Heather was funny. Watching every one of the kids falling in love with their respective individual and it not being reciprocated mostly was funny. Ellen was a little heartbreaking, but Little Pete and Nona, that was just adorable. And Nona has always been probably my second favorite supporting character, just under Artie. But I can't think of another episode where you've had a supporting character carry the narrative. which I find really interesting. So that way you can get both sides of the Pete's stories in this, but also you get to see her loyalty as she tries to help little Pete, and how she knows his world well enough to who to go to, and is brave enough to go to his bullies, and is willing to, as awful as it is, put little Pete in our Pit Stain's in a headlock and threaten to beat him up. But of course, Pit Stain is professing his undying love to Nona, and she's not having that. She's ignoring all those advances as well, and even being grossed out at the fact that he's made a statue of her in different kinds of meat. But Nona is very much the main protagonist, and once everything is all done and this all subsides, she's still there by little Pete's side, even though he didn't reciprocate the love back. She still cares for him, and they're still very good friends, and they will always be very good friends.
That was like a swerve of like the cast reveal, like
Yeah. The real villain is Eunice for infecting everyone. I also do want to mention real quick that something about Crisis in the Love Zone, even if it's not the episode I'm defending, really gives me Billy Madison vibes. Just something about everyone going gaga over Spring Fever reminds me a lot of like those moments when we see all the characters like slowly run to each other and come together, especially Chris Farley and the Giant Penguin, or like when they're handing out Valentines in class, and Billy has that awkward interaction with the substitute teacher who's the revolting blob guy. So there's a lot of fun to be had here.
Yeah, I appreciate that comparison a lot, actually. That's great. Cool. I like both your arguments a lot. That's going to be a really tough category. I guess I'm curious, what's the defining moment for your main character that defines love, I guess?
I believe Big Pete's defining moment is when he reveals his own secret about accidentally killing Edna the fighting squid. It takes a lot to admit your faults, as I mentioned before. It takes a lot of maturity, even when there's the potential consequence for punishment or at least beratement by an adult, semi-authority figure. I don't know how much authoritative power Mr. Beverly has as a groundskeeper, but at the very least, he'd be upset at him for killing the mascot. I always think back to that scene even after rewatching this episode multiple times, because it was a real like Hey Arnold moment for him, where he did the right thing, and by doing the right thing, it set him free from just the guilt that was weighing on him of how to handle the situation. And I really love how Ellen's running back to him and saying, "Don't do it, Pete. I didn't tell him," because I was expecting them to like hug and kiss, but of course, Ellen's just being Ellen, being a good best friend, and telling him what really happened with their interaction at the park, where like Ellen is flying the kites with open face. So I feel like that's the turning point of the episode, where we're in this kind of weird what's happening dynamic with Pete and Miss Fingerwood and Mr. Beverly and Open Face and Ellen and everyone, and it just recalibrates back to what we've already established in the beginning of the episode. So I appreciate that moment more than any other in the episode as a result.
All right, Alex, you may have already said your defining scene, but I'll let.
Yes, it is one that I had mentioned, but I do believe, for at least in terms of the main character, it is the part where Nona is watching the VHS tape over on LoveCon 4, and how this is it. He is not going to be able to recover from this. But this entire episode, and every episode leading up to this, we've always seen that close relationship, that close bond, and just how they're almost brother and sister like. But there could be an argument, like what Brett had said as a joke, where the mail carrier could potentially be, the one spreading the disease throughout, because of all the love letters that she's passing out. But everyone we've seen has fallen in love with someone else, and it was almost immediate once they saw them, and they were already in love. We didn't see the build-up. Whereas Nona has had no build-up. She's always been loyal to Little Pete, and the moment that Little Pete was, I can't get away from this. I'm going to say this. Don't remember me like the little sappy, gross person that I'm about to become. Remember me as I was. And upon reflecting of all the different things, weird things that the two of them have done together, including pulling him out of the ground when he was grounded, which was a great little callback, that's when she really appreciated who he is even farther. And coming from, on a personal level, coming from a relationship where my wife was my best friend, and I had tried, no joke, 3 years to get her to agree to even date me, but she didn't want to because, one, I was weird, and then two, she was afraid that if something happened to us, our friendship would be lost. But finally, when she agreed to it, then obviously you see where we're at now. But I've come from that place of being close friends and then slowly building that relationship to the point where now it's something much stronger. And I know that's not what happens throughout the entire series of Pete and Pete, but I can see it happening from this one episode. And I would not be opposed to seeing the two of them be a pretty awesome rebel couple. They could be the Bonnie and Clyde of the series, which would have been fun to see. But that moment is the moment that that is a defining moment for her, even if it was a disease going around, which I don't see it as that. That's the only one that I don't see as being spring fever. And that felt genuine.
Interesting. Okay. I will bring up for our Pete and Pete nerds, we do get Krebstar's official slogan.
Yes.
In LoveCon videos, right?
Operation Hard Punch is brought to you by the fine folks at Krebstar. From sponge cake to space stations, it's gotta be Krebstar.
When I was watching that episode in preparation for this episode today, I'm like, wow, that's where Allie got it from. So cool. I need to see more Krebstar products. Don't use it. Don't use that in your decision because that's an unfair advantage. Krebstar wasn't invented in Valentine's Day Massacre.
No, it's true. You are not given that advantage. So we can't include Krebstar in this discussion today.
Yeah, we can't even consider the Retro Riley jetpack because that wasn't until New Year's Pete.
Right. Yeah, and is that even Krebstar? Who knows? Yeah. But yeah, I just love it, from sponge cake to space stations. There's an international space station up there that's Krebstar owned. It's impressive.
Is it made out of sponge cake? That's the real question.
Yeah, get these little Krebbies, right?
Yeah.
All right. I think this is going to be a very tough category for me, the Citizens of Wellsville, and it's because I am one of maybe the few Pete and Pete fans that really actually love the side characters more than I love the main characters. So I'm excited to hear your arguments for why your episode highlights Citizens of Wellsville better than the other.
Well, for starters, I started eating open-faced sandwiches ever seeing this episode for the first time. I'm like, what is an open-faced sandwich? Oh, you just eat a sandwich without the top half of bread? How cool. And it's very difficult to eat it, especially with all the different types he has. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm trying to do this in alphabetical order to the best of my ability. So starting off with Valentine's Massacre, Citizens of Wellsville, we have Mr. Beverly. He is the groundskeeper of the football field, maybe other parts of the school. I don't know. And we see him a lot interacting basically with Open Face, saying, keep Big Pete from slobbering all over Miss Fingerwood because he's mighty jealous of her, even though he's too shy to admit that he has a crush on Miss Fingerwood as well. And I really appreciate how he expresses his personality just by drawing white paint lines with his little painting cart thing. Because it's not something you really think about when you see a football field until you actually see someone doing it, and how it takes a lot of skill to do it nice and straight, or even in a shape of a heart, as we see at the end of the episode, which is quite a feat for him. even when we see him in his lowest moments, he's got, he's wobbling around all over the place and trying to deflect the influence of Open Face and, those dark thoughts that are trying to permeate his head. But he's always on the sidelines trying to keep involved with the story. And I appreciate that a side character is doing all that he can to take an active role in the episode, because we don't really see that too often, aside from like Mr. Tasty, for example. We also have Mrs. Fingerwood, who later becomes a mainstay of the Citizens of Wellsville, as we see her multiple times in later episodes. We have X equals Y and A Hard Day's Pete, to name a few, where she really has a more prominent role. But this is the start of it all. We established that she is passionate about math. She's very quirky. She expresses herself a lot through numbers and things like that. And it's fun to see how she interacts with all of her students, because she's just constantly on with the math. Like, did you know that there's like, my cat has the square root of 7 as my name? I know that's from a different episode, but I'm just, listing an example of types of things she would say to other people. And I find that charming. And she also is like an ally to the Pete's as well, because she seems like she's there to help them when they need them. Of course, we have the bully of the episode, who's named Open Face, named after the sandwiches that he assembles before he pounds the living daylights out of his victims. And we see quite a slew of different concoctions there, from like peanut butter and herring, or pickled herring, something to that extent, which was actually in a Hey Arnold episode called Eating Contest, of all places. We also see like a fluffernutter one that was like used as like a refrigerator magnet for back of a letter. What better way of expressing it, where it like glued the ransom note or the threat to their bunk bed, saying, give up the squid, or I'll make you admit your secret. And of course we have to talk about Open Face's minions, because he's got quite a few of them in his posse, ranging from Butt Stripe, who has like this mud stripe on his khaki pants that won't go away from him riding his bike in the mud. We have Gravy Breath, who smells worse than a rotten turkey dinner whenever she opens her mouth. We have Ink Stain, who has like ink splotches all over his jacket, and is actually played by Ty Swanson, who played Ian in the Tale of the Midnight Ride in Are You Afraid of the Dark. So there's a fun Are You Afraid of the Dark connection there. And we also have Milk Mustache, who's pretty self-explanatory. I guess he drinks milk a lot and wipes it away before, they pound people. And then we have Audi, who apparently has like a belly button that sticks 3 feet out, although we never see her from the waist down, so we can't see the mystical wonders of such a sight. And of course, we have some more of our supporting characters lumped in as well, where we have Little Pete, who's very cute and adorable at this stage of the series, running around with the oversized, bulky turtleneck that we've seen him in the shorts before. He doesn't really do too much other than just be there as Big Pete's lackey to keep their secret under wraps, like radio in on the walkie-talkie to Ellen if there's trouble, or if he runs an Open Face, make sure he keeps the secret while they like try to get it off him by drawing a mustache on Petunia and other stuff with marker, which is very disrespectful to people who sport tattoos. And then we also have Ellen, who's in the best friend role, but is also feeling threatened by Mrs. Fingerwood coming between her and Big Pete. She's also doing her best to keep the secret about the deceased squid, but also is interested in pursuing her own love interest after she realizes that she can't count the 1 million to please Pete to get him back on her side. So I really appreciate her like shifting of allies, or moralities, I guess, if you will, here. And then last but not least, we have the great almighty Edna the Fighting Squid, which I actually have a sticker of right here.
Oh, I happen to have that same one on my water.
Yeah, I remember you bought it for me.
What's the slogan? People got to know the slogan.
Could you remind me?
Well, on your sticker there and on the bucket, when he kills the
oh yeah, it is on there.
The squid, it reads "Squirt him to victory."
Squirt him to victory. Yep.
Oh man. Too good.
Yeah. Yeah, I forgot I put that. That was a while back. But well, we can show pictures of those on the screen of that. And I also have an Open Face one, eating that weird herring sandwich. So we got quite an assortment of characters here, and it really helps the episode feel full. Like, even though obviously we have student extras in the classrooms, it feels like a lived-in world with all these different characters who are roaming it, whether it's at school, on the streets, in the classroom. We don't really go home. We do see a tiny glimpse of Mom and Dad when Don Wrigley is practicing his discus throwing, and I wish we saw a little bit more of them. But I'm glad that we were able to fit in as many people as we were able to without sacrificing the integrity of the story itself, which is about Big Pete handling this romance and how it's like making his world crumble around him. But by him coming together and assuming responsibility for the thing he did, it just puts everything back into balance. And I like how, just as a final thought, I like how that connects to the imagery and the foreshadowing of the scene where Miss Fingerwood's class is like doing that weird solar system exercise where she has the giant sun around her face and everyone's holding a planet revolving around her, because it seems like at that point the plot is revolving around her along with Pete being sucked into it, because she comes towards him in that big old sun headpiece, acting concerned for him because he got punched in the face by this point. And so it's like we're visually seeing how the dynamic is shifting, and I really appreciate the expert, clever use of all these characters to keep the plot interesting and moving around all these different twists and turns instead of just going straight through the story.
All right, Alex, tell me about season 3 Citizens.
Before I get to that, I do want to, just because I find it fun, go on to Mr. Beverly from Valentine's Day Massacre. We all have those actors that we like who are usually very small supporting character actors, but once you see them in other movies and TV shows, it's like, oh man, I'm so excited, because you just love to see that person. Mr. Beverly is one of those for me, and I had actually completely forgotten that he was in this episode, because this guy, I don't know the guy's name. I'm sorry. He's one of those actors, unfortunately. You know the face, but you don't know the name. But he was in 2 understandably terrible movies, but I love them both. I don't care what anyone says. He was in both the Super Mario Brothers movie, where he was Spike, and he was also on Howard the Duck.
Oh.
And at one point, Howard the Duck threatens that he's going to bite somebody's face, and they were going to get space rabies.
Oh my gosh.
And the guy who's about to get bit looks over at Richie, and Richie was the same guy who plays Mr. Beverly, and goes, "Is that a real disease?" And in his voice, he goes, "I don't know. I heard something about that on the news."
I bite your face. You're a dead man, Ginger.
What are you talking about?
Space rabies.
Richie, is that a real disease?
I don't know, Ginger. I heard something about that on the news.
So I keep, every time he was in this episode, I kept imagining, I waited for him to say something.
I do want to mention real quick that I did look up his name, and it's Richard Edson. So for anyone who's curious who Mr. Beverly is, that's his actor or real life name.
Richard Edson in this, his facial expressions are so wonderful, and yeah, of course his line delivery, like,
stay off the line.
Yeah, he's like is so heartbroken at like the idea of somebody standing on his his work. Like, I just love that conveying of his facial expressions, taking those out. And then to kind of attack on, or to jump on a little bit of Alex's point, I think this show in general just does an incredible job with one-time characters.
Yes.
Over the course of the entire series. Yeah, I can really appreciate Mr. Beverly in a lot of ways because of that.
I think that's why the Citizens of Wellsville has become such a beloved part of Pete and Pete lore, I guess you can put it, because we get all these little tiny snapshots of all the different inhabitants, very much like all the different characters of Springfield in The Simpsons, and we put them all together for certain scenes where some of them come back. We're like, oh yeah, I remember those people, and it just feels really lived in when you take the time visually and develop their character, to have them do a few things relative to the main characters to help us realize this isn't just a show, it's a community, and this community is always going to be there for its viewers as long as they're there for the show.
Yeah, it's the suburbs.
Yeah.
Everyone knows what that person is most well known for, and they've always got that nickname that sticks with them now because, oh yeah, that's that guy. He's a guy who had pits. Everyone remembers Pit Stain.
Or Mrs. Blowtard with the arm flub from what we did on our summer vacation.
Yeah, everyone's got their own personalities. They're all fleshed out. They've got those little quirks that everyone remembers them for. Only it's filtered through the eyes of a wildly imaginative child. Yeah. So, yes, it's very easy to see why the citizens of Wellsville are so well beloved. But going to season 3. Yes, we've got Ellen as a supporting character, but that's pretty standard. We do get a bit of hairnet and who was the other one?
Night Brace.
Was with it? Night Brace, but they're very much in passing, and they were helping Pit Stain. Which, speaking of, we have Pit Stain in this episode, who goes to pretty extreme lengths. Probably more so than anyone else to prove his undying love, because one, as mentioned earlier, he makes that Nona-sized replica of her out of all kinds of different meats, and he also gets a heart-shaped suntan on his chest.
Wait, hold on. I got something to show you.
Oh no. Are you going to strip
not a
again for the show?
suntan, not a suntan. I made this for you. It's a Smashing Pumpkins shirt from their Gis album.
Perfect.
Yeah, I planned it.
Also for this episode, we have Eunice Puel, who is the mail carrier. And as Allie had said when she had arrived, that say it again for me.
Well, she has like a whole speech about the bees and the everything, but the most memorable of that was that chirpity chirpity chee.
That's the one. That's the one.
Can't help but say it too.
Oh, melts my heart.
She was a fun character. She looks like she could be Jessica Gaines' mother from All the Crazy Kids. They look very similar, but she was very happy. It's hokey and cheesy, but it's spring fever, so she's very gee golly, and it's really infectious. Even as an audience member, I was getting spring fever just listening to all this. And you have Clark the Turtle, which was fun, who again mostly served as a giant key, which was not what you expect.
He comes back from Range Boy because we first see him with Artie on the golf course. And
another fun one, it was a one-off character, but it was while Little Pete was with Eunice and he was trying to woo her, and then she keeps going and he stops and he turns back and tells Johnny the fiddle player, keep fiddling, because behind them was a fiddle player in a nice little suit just playing serenading the two of them, which was a fun gag, but it was only that one time. But that's pretty much the only characters that we really see. There's not as many members of Wellsville in this episode, and even Pit Stain is watered down considerably in this episode from where Nona had tried to utilize his bully and his aggressive personality to snap Little Pete out of this. He's got Little Pete in a headlock, and he's still professing his undying love to Nona, and he's saying how wonderful love is, and Pete is right here under his arm also saying how wonderful love is, and it's not something that you would normally expect, but seeing these two get along and not grossed out at each other, especially Little Pete being in the most awful location at the moment, didn't bother him a bit. But the main focus, it was the main characters, and Ellen and Big Pete and Little Pete and Nona. So there's not as many Wellsvillians this episode as there is on Valentine's Massacre. But for what little bit they're in there, and you do have some citizens again just to paint the picture of them being romantically involved. Like I said earlier, wiping the mustache. You got the elderly couple who have the teddy bears that are kissing, and then a couple that's spinning. And at one point, one of them is putting down a jacket on top of a puddle on the sidewalk, and Big Pete literally runs on top of it to catch the tennis ball, and also runs across that Nona statue, meat statue, knocks that over. But for the most part, there's not as many, and they're not as prominent in this episode.
Don't forget Heather, the tennis player, too.
Yes, Heather, that skank. She was hateful. Like I had said earlier, she was the only character who did not like anybody, never fell in love, and was very annoyed with not only Big Pete but also with Ellen. I don't see how she kept coming back playing with Ellen. I'm surprised she didn't stop, because again, for those who aren't aware, Big Pete kept asking Ellen to please overshoot the ball out of the court, and they're fenced in. So if it went over the fence, she would ask for somebody. Can someone please go get that? And Big Pete was, hey, I'll take care of that for you.
Great game, tennis. More of a badminton man myself. It's like tennis. Thinner racket, no ball. If you'd like to learn.
I'll hire a pro.
Just nonstop, doing that over and over. And then Ellen gets the ball again and shoots it over again. And Heather is getting more and more annoyed. Oh, gee, imagine that. But it was really fun to see. It was almost like Pepe Le Pew and that cat.
I am Pepe Le Pew, your lover. So impetuous, but nice.
I've always kind of found those type of relationships, especially for Valentine's Day episodes, really fun.
Yeah, Heather really reminded me of like a standard 90s like bully girl, and just very bratty and preppy, and yeah.
I was thinking she was the missing mean girl from the movie Mean Girls.
I felt like she was she should have been on Bring It On.
Yeah. Yeah, she's got that cheerleader sass.
There's just a couple stray observations I wanted to throw out there. One, Mrs. Fingerwood's bolo tie is the pie symbol, which I thought was great for her character. Yeah, and Brett, you brought up, Clark making a triumphant return from season 1. I just thought that was so cool. Yeah. And then also, Brett, you brought this up a bit. Like I from when I was watching the episode, I think Open Face's Fluffernutter sandwich is so strong it breaks their bedroom window.
Yeah, how does that work?
Yes.
They use as a brick to threaten Big Pete, which I thought was such a funny use of that that
like
prop,
sound effect visual.
Yeah. It's that cracked me up. And the way they get that shot of it just sliding down, perfect. Yeah.
And I think it falls off as soon as Open Face is done narrating the letter, which is like beautiful timing.
Dear Carrot Head, let's settle this mess once and for all. Meet me at Langley Field an hour before homeroom, you miserable wuss. Sincerely yours, Open Face.
I love how like proper he is, but he's also, a jerk.
Yeah.
All right, cool. That's gonna be an interesting category. See how it turns out. But this might be the most important category for our discussion today, and that's the use of the theme of love in your episode.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear how love is the defining factor of your episode.
Love is like the sun. Everything revolves around it in life, and all the characters revolve around Miss Fingerwood because she is the center of the romance for Big P in this one. And it affects everyone's relationships, no matter how they're, related to it or what their distance is. For obviously, Big Pete gets sucked in full force to the epicenter, and then Ellen tries to pull him out of it but can't. So, she ends up going over to Open Face, who's trying to distance herself and also push Mr. Beverly towards it. And so it's wild. I mean, love really messes with people when you are infatuated with people, and there are also other people who are infatuated with the same person, because it makes you do things you wouldn't normally do to try and either gain the advantage or just have them for yourself. And it's not something I typically think about when I think about love, because at school it's just like you're only thinking about yourself and the person you like, not necessarily other people. But I like how the use of the love theme here brings everyone together, and even comes to a head with everyone expressing their love and respect for Edna the Squid. Even though she passed on, they still paid their respects, and that's where we open up with the episode where Pete is there. And they even have a plaque that I read, which is very sweet. Apparently she lived from 1965 to 1990, go figure. So she had a long, prosperous life as a squid in a bucket. But that being said, it plays a lot with different facets of love, and going deeper and peeling back the layers of the heart-shaped onion here, because we get like people pretending to be in love to get something they want with Open-Face and Ellen. We get people who are jealous who fall in love with other people, with Ellen kind of going to Open-Face. We have jealous love, where Mr. Beverly is like watching from afar because he can't quite get the courage to talk to Mrs. Fingerwood and express his feelings. We have like child adult love, which is more like infatuation going on and playing around with the ideas of love versus reality of love there, between Big Pete and Mrs. Fingerwood. And of course, maybe even Little Pete and his love for his tattoo, because he's devastated when Open-Face draws on her, and she deserves some attention as well because she's always there right by his side on his arm. Love does a lot of strange things to people, but in the end, it really steers you to where you need to go and to do the right things when you're true to yourself. And I really appreciate that genuine core element that sets everything back to normal here.
All right. Alex, end your episode.
So for mine, love eventually makes it through. It's everyone is affected by love in this episode. Everyone, except for Heather. But well, no, that's not necessarily true, because she is affected by it, just indirectly.
What about Clark? Is he affected by love?
Yes, because he wouldn't have been used as a key if Little Pete wasn't affected.
Case in point, everyone is involved.
Everyone was affected by love in some capacity in this episode, and you see it done in different ways. Spring fever is real. I don't care what anyone says. If you've been in junior high or high school, and once it gets nice and warm, you see everyone fawning over everyone else, and we've seen every single one of these things play out. Yes, in the beginning, when Little Pete and Nona are seeing all these couples who are together and happy, it's gross. Ew, gross. But we've seen those. There are people who are romantically involved and very happy to be romantically involved. You also have the ones who fawn over the other person, but the other person's not having it, which we have seen with Nona and Pitstain, and we also saw with Big Pete and Heather. We also see those times whenever someone falls in love with a teacher or has a crush on their teacher. Not only does Big Pete have that with his teacher, but you have Little Pete do that, not necessarily with a teacher, but with an authority figure in a way, because you also have the mail carrier. I mean, people like kids fall in love with anyone. Yay hormones. But you also have those people who are infatuated with someone else, but they're infatuated with someone else, which is what you had with Ellen, with Big Pete, with Heather. You also have those people who go too far with their infatuation, like Pitstain with that giant statue that's just, no, gross. But also you have those relationships that stem from a place of foundation, which is what Nona and Little Pete had. And you also have those who suffer in silence, which was Ellen in this episode. She was there for Big Pete more than he realizes. And then once he was in the hospital recovering with a broken leg, she kept her feelings to herself and continued to do so because she knows it's not going to go anywhere, at least not right now. And there is a whole gamut, a whole range of different types of love that you see in different levels, but it's all here, and the entire episode is centered around love and how it affects everyone involved. Not even those who are directly in love with someone else, but they have to deal with everyone else who is. So, yeah, love hurts.
Love
hurts.
Nice.
You Def Leppard.
Okay. I think one follow-up question I have for you two is which is a more realistic love story in yours?
Mine.
Love to hear why.
I have to explain. I feel like I'm going to be, just because of the span of the show and the nature of the categories, I'm going to be retreading some water here or have some overlap with the categories. School romance happens. People get crushes on different people, different authority figures. There's unrequited love here. Mrs. Fingerwood doesn't necessarily like Pete back. She expresses care and concern from him, but she doesn't fall in love with him. Like, hey, let's go on a date right now. No, that doesn't happen. And that's one of the things that many people learn about when they grow up and learn about different types of love. You know, you got the puppy love, you got the more lustful love, you got truly romantic love, unrequited love, et cetera, et cetera. And it's very sobering to see the different types being displayed throughout the different character dynamics as things kind of get out of whack throughout the course of the plots. And also relate to your own personal experiences, because we've also talked a little bit briefly about this on our Patreon episode that's also love themed, and how sometimes things don't always work out the way you want them to, even if you have the best intentions, even if you're trying to do things to make the other person like you. There are just some things that get in the way, you know, age, race, gender, career, you name it, that just it doesn't allow things to work out. But at least if there's anything I learned from watching this episode and remember, is that you don't necessarily have to try hard to be yourself. And when you are yourself, the right people come into your life to appreciate you for you. And very similar of how Nona actually loves and appreciates Little Pete in Crisis in the Love Zone, Ellen does the same for Big Pete in Valentine's Day Massacre, because obviously we've seen them have a fight and grow apart about, you know, the little invisible guy that Ellen smashed in that science lab. But even with their quarrels and the conflict and people pulling them apart, they still found each other in the end because they remember why they care about each other. And it's just because they're great friends. They have a lot of adventures together and they're always there for each other. They have each other's back. And sometimes friendship is more important than love, and you can't let that get in the way if you have something special right in front of you. And I wholeheartedly relate to that, because I've been in a few situations where I thought I loved someone or I thought they loved me, and it didn't quite line up. And there were a couple of scenarios where it didn't work out because we were on different pages, but one of my best friends who agreed to be best friends with me after we talked about our feelings, it actually worked out better that we stayed friends instead of take things further. And so, you know, it's nice to know that there's hope and that love doesn't have to be the end-all be-all goal. And for that, and for the layers of subtlety that you can look into it with Big Pete's adventure through love and Valentine's Day Massacre, I find that highly relatable and realistic.
All right, Alex, why is yours more realistic?
Well, one, because it's happened here in this house. So there you go. There's one. But also it takes everything that Brett had just talked about and it adds to it, because you do have those relationships where people have fallen for someone who's, I don't want to say out of their league, because that's not necessarily true, but someone who, it is an unobtainable relationship, which again is also something that we had mentioned in the Patreon episode, because a student falling in love with a teacher, that's not typically going to work. I don't think it ever really has. And that's not to slight either episode. That's a reality, because it happens in the Valentine's Day Massacre, and it also happens in this episode where Little Pete and the mail carrier. But they have those crushes for those people, and the crushes don't have that back. But that is a whole different level of why that's not going to work, as opposed to Pitstain and Nona not working, or Heather and Big Pete not working. That's just because they have the very different personalities, and that's not going to work. Also, we've seen that. We've seen every single one of these. We've seen one person who pines after somebody else, but that person's pining after somebody else. Hello, high school happens everywhere you go. And then you have those people who, again, case in point me, where you have those relationships with someone and it builds and grows into something else. And you also have those everything that I had mentioned in the previous category, or in the previous question. It all happens. It all happens. So I think Brett's very much focuses on one, maybe two relationships. And because you have Big Pete with the teacher, but you also have Ellen and how that affects her. And that's very much not quite a love triangle, but in a way it is. It takes that one aspect and fleshes it out, but you can't do that again for another episode. So they take that in this episode and then add to it. So it's no longer a bullseye. It's a whole target. And you get to see love affecting a community as opposed to affecting a smaller group of people. And both are completely believable within their realms of taking things to the extreme, as Pete and Pete does.
I real quick wanted to mention that this wasn't brought up, I don't think, to a point I was hoping to, but I think love will make you do crazy things. And I think this episode had great examples of that. I think the most interesting was both Openface and Little Pete are willing to remove their standard hats and hair to make themselves more presentable to the people they're trying to pine for. I found that very interesting that Pete was willing to give up his hat for Eunice. So
not only give it up, but comb his hair.
You stole my line. I was trying to say it fast enough. I'm like, wow, they got the middle part and the slicked hair.
Yeah. I just found that interesting. Also, Pitstain going to his levels of extremes with the meat sculpture, and then he's thinking crazy, like, you don't want me to beat him up. This is a test. I won't do it. Like, yeah. So, all right. Well, we have one final category, and I'm leaving this up to interpretation to you on what your definition of lovesick is. Now, the category that we presented was why your Pete is more lovesick. So, I'm just gonna let you guys do it how you would like to argue it, and we'll see who comes out the victor here.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep it brief because I don't want to keep sounding like a broken record. I think most of us can relate to falling in love with a teacher we really connect with at least once in our lives, especially if they happen to be young or attractive or your type. Throughout most of the episode, Big Pete fawns over Mrs. Fingerwood, convincing himself that all her quirky, mathematically driven personality traits are something he desires. But Ellen takes notice, and it drives them apart, at least for a while. Big Pete is a classic case of loving the idea of a woman rather than the woman herself. It's easy to get all lovey-dovey when you focus on all the positive traits of a person and then amplify them like a concert speaker in your head. But I find that if you do succeed, and Big Pete does in the end, in winning the heart of your object of desire, the reality check eventually hits you. And in Big Pete's case, when he and Miss Fingerwood spend one-on-one time with each other in the classroom, they find that they don't really have as much in common as they previously thought. So it does tie in with your previous question, Allie, of how this can be realistic, where, the image and what we see in front of us don't quite line up. Thankfully, Big Pete coming to his senses, resemblances the dynamics of all the characters, bringing things back to the status quo, the football fields, and I feel that in his love sickness, he really pushed like a lot of characters out to their uncomfortable corners of their boundaries. Even Little Pete, who took a minor backseat role in this episode, acting as like a spy or someone to keep a lookout for him in the face of a big bad bully and his minions. I mean, would you, as Little Pete's age in this episode, maybe 6, go up against a big threatening bully and all of his lackeys? just to defend a secret. I mean, I think that's quite a bit of courage it takes to stand up in the name of love and friendship, even, which is, I would argue, is a form of love. So it's like, because Big Pete is radiating all this love sickness that he feels for his teacher, it's throwing everything else off that's a part of the universe or the solar system, so to speak here. And yeah, I'm trying really hard not to retread old ideas, because at this point I feel like I'm just saying over and over and over, but it's about Big Pete falling in love and keeping his secret and finding ways to grapple with that. And so, through the roller coaster of infatuation, him and Miss Fingerwood keep things amicable. She ends up taking more of an interest in Mr. Beverly. All is normal, at least for now. And, it's nice to get at least a hint that thread continues throughout the rest of the series in certain episodes where Big Pete and Miss Fingerwood interact, or at least in the same scene together.
Alex, go ahead.
And you had actually mentioned exactly what I was going to mention for this category, which is the fact that love makes people do crazy things. This is exactly what I was going to end with, because every character has gone to some degree. Of course, Pitstain goes with the Nona thing, the Nona statue, and Little Pete with the hat, but also he's very, very against his normal personality. Because he's writing love notes, and although the love note is in true Little Pete fashion, where it's less sweet, but it's still rough and rebellious, but in a sweet attitude, in a sweet tone, which is kind of cute. But also, you have those moments where you are completely blinded by love, which was what Big Pete was having with Heather and what Pitstain was having with Nona. You also have the moment of where Little Pete is faced with, what am I doing? I've made a mistake. That realization of, this is not gonna happen. This isn't gonna work. And probably the most prominent outside of Nona and Little Pete, and especially Nona realizing her feelings for Little Pete, Ellen at the end in the hospital, and that whole scene with the mail carrier when Eunice brings the letter back to her. That whole scene is a very profound moment for the episode, and probably one of the most profound things about love that Pete and Pete has ever addressed, just done through the guise of being male. From where, again, I had done a little bit of it, but the male said, or Eunice had said that the male is not perfect, but like love, it eventually finds its way through. Because she gave that letter back to Ellen, knowing that that's yours, not mine. Everyone has gone through an extreme degree of love sickness. Most people aren't going to write love letters to somebody else, and most people won't go to full extremes that Nona does to help somebody avoid love sickness. And most people also don't tackle somebody else to profess their undying love for them. But every single one of those happens in this episode, and it happens to almost every character.
Okay. Any last minute thoughts before I start working out my decision here?
Doyle rules. I wish it was in the same universe.
The only thing I think that we've got to add right here is, before we get to your verdict, let's go to a commercial break. And when we come back, we will hear Allie's verdicts. So we'll be right back.
Nickelodeon wants to help you explain Roundhouse to the adults. Step 1, tell them about the practical use of press-on lips, the importance of daily exercise, and the educational value of preteen genetically altered martial arts iguanas. Step 2, show them the difference between dancing and dancing. And finally, step 3, describe the show. Awesome, dude! Totally dutiful! And if they still don't get it, then they probably never will. Watch Roundhouse every Saturday starting at 8:30, 7:30 Central on SNIC.
Pete and Pete isn't the only show that is going to battle this Valentine's season. Rocko's Modern Life is getting in on the action against Ren and Stimpy with their debut on Splat Attack. With our judge Carl from 90s Nicktoon, Brett and I have a versus battle between I Love Chicken and Love Spanked. Which show is the better fit for Valentine's Day? You will only find the answer over on our Patreon. This season, we are looking to give you Slimesters more content than ever before. If you enjoy our content, please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Also leave us a review when possible. While you're at it, head over to our patreon.com/SplatAttack to get an early access of our main episodes, join us for live streams, as well as gain access to exclusive episodes and all of our backlog of Patreon episodes, such as our Rocco and Ren and Stimpy Versus episode. Join the Gagoids over on Patreon and get more of the slime-filled past. All right, we are back. Allie, I hand it over to you.
I've made a grid. I've taken a lot of notes here, and I'm, there were some points I was hoping some of you would make and maybe touch on. Whether or not we did those, we can kind of go over that. So let's start back at the story, our first category. You have, I think, Alex, you brought up an interesting point that yes, season 3 has its experience in writing, and maybe it's a little more tight, but that's a tough position to put a pilot episode into, right? Like, yeah. There's a lot they have to introduce and they have to do to get there. But I went with Valentine's Day Massacre on this one, and so and the reason being is that Brett did do a better job of conveying in the argument why this story was a little better. I think he hit on more of the points of what they were trying to convey and talked about the conflicts. And I really appreciated that Brett brought this up, that Big Pete does a ton of character growth in one episode. I thought that was pretty fascinating way of conveying that. He goes from being afraid to admit what he did wrong to abashedly, I'm going to, I did do this and I'm owning up to it. And I thought that was a really great point. And it was one that really made the story a little stronger. When we go into main characters, this was an interesting one. I was wondering if Alex was going to consider Little Pete the main character or where we were at with that. I think both episodes struggle with who is the main character here. Alex, I think maybe you could argue that Mr. Beverly is more of a main character in this episode, or Mrs. Fingerwood, whereas in Crisis in the Love Zone, is it Little Pete? Is it Nona? Is it Eunice?
Is it Eunice?
There's a lot of things going, but Alex, you blew me away with your argument for Nona. I'm going with you on this one. You have made me appreciate that episode more as a whole by talking about the development of Nona and her commitment to Pete as a friend, and the strongest point of she's the only one willing to say I love you in this whole thing. It really drove home the point that Pete's like, I won't say these words, I can't do it. And I thought that was very compelling argument for Nona. So great job on that one. Wellsville Citizens. This is a great category. Both these episodes have really fun depictions of their citizens. Pitstain is one of my least favorite bullies of the series. I don't think he's super imaginative. I don't think they use him to his best abilities. However, he does. I think this is his strongest episode if you're going to make an argument for Pitstain. But Wellsville and Valentine's Day Massacre, they really are hitting it on the noggin on this one. I mean, Mr. Beverly, you advocated for his performance. I mean, the fact that we get to say butt stripe on a podcast is a one special thing. I have my own podcast called Notable Nostalgia, and we brought Will McRobb in for an interview, and one of the things I told him that I love about the show is the bullies and how they do it. And he talked about that his inspiration was for the bullies, and naming them was Dick Tracy, and how those villains were kind of created by like their facial features or whatever. And so that was sort of what the inspiration was for naming a lot of their characters, and it carried through season 3 clearly, right? But Open Face is so good. He is so dang good as a bully, and I wish he was in more.
Me too.
But I do find the citizens a little more compelling in Valentine's Day Massacre. Love theme. This was an interesting one. Ultimately, I went with Alex on this one. It was, Brad, I think you stretched a little bit in your argument. I don't know how much love one can have for a squid,
but it's so cute with its boxing gloves on.
Right. I think both years had very similar in the love of a child with an adult person, getting infatuated with an adult presence in their life. But Alex really brought it home with this larger range of love depiction. And I thought the best example was talking about when the idea of unwanted love, like somebody showing affection for you when you don't want this, and setting those boundaries. And Pitstain is the best example of that by like, I've made a meat sculpture of you. Like, ew, that's disgusting. And would
you eat it?
So I found Alex's argument there a little stronger and went there, which leads us to a tie here. And I'm so torn because I think I have to come down to who argued the point better, and the category was which Pete was more lovesick. And I'm going with Brett on this one because Brett argued more for his Pete, and Alex, yours was more of an argument for everyone. And I felt like if I'm sticking to the categories, I'm going with Brett's arguments. But Alex, you made me appreciate Crisis in the Love Zone so much more as a fan of Pete and Pete.
I'll take that.
Season 3 definitely needs more love.
It does. Yeah, Valentine's Day does have a lot of love. It won an ACE award for children's TV, and season 3 gets a lot of undue criticism
and neglect because it never got its DVD release, which I will curse the sky until the day I die until that thing is actually in the hands of Pete and Pete fans.
Yeah. But Alex, the points you brought up, and I would love to continue to have more Pete and Pete discussions because you did the same thing for me in New Year's Pete. I went in thinking this is kind of a mid-level episode, and your points brought it up a notch for me. So I appreciate these discussions quite a bit. And I think if you would have drove home the fact that this is the first time that we've seen Little Pete in love, whereas Big Pete, he's always in love. There's always a love story. I think if you could have drove that home, you would have won the argument. But just a technicality with those category descriptions. So
that's okay. I haven't won an episode battle yet, so let me
yeah, I was gonna say
victory.
This is my first loss.
This was a well-earned victory, and Brett, you did a great job in conveying the story, which is one of the more important categories, and of course the Citizens of Wellsville. So, but both great arguments, both just a fun discussion. I'm glad you chose these 2 episodes.
Valentine's Day Massacre wins.
yeah, thanks for letting me take that all in and make a decision for you.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you back here and just talk Pete and Pete with us. And originally I wanted to just do a Valentine's Day Massacre episode review, but I thought, wait a minute, Pete and Pete has a lot of themes that overlap. Let's just make it interesting and do an episode battle, which has, episode review and versus components in it to really jazz things up.
And it's really crazy that doing this, you see these parallels in so many ways. They're really similar episodes, but yeah, it's cool to see it brought up.
So for my ratings of these two episodes, I'm going to start with Valentine's Day Massacre, and I'm going to give this one a Splatcellent, which is an A. And the reason for that is because I really appreciate Big Pete's growth throughout the course of this episode, despite the fact that it's really the first episode that sets the tone for the entire series. So right off the bat, we know that he is a very mature character that carries the series through his narrations. I also really appreciate just being introduced to a cast of really interesting characters, both main and supporting. We get to see Ellen, Little Pete, get to see Mr. Beverly, Mrs. Fingerwood, and it really comes together in the end, despite the problem being addressed super early in the plot with Edna being accidentally murdered by Pete's stray discus. It's an episode that I don't necessarily revisit often, but I do it from time to time, and it is one of the episodes I actually have an art print of as a poster in my room that I constantly refer to, because I could certainly relate to Big Pete's romance predicament that he had back then. So, I'd say it's one of the stronger episodes amongst the Pete and Pete series, regardless of where it's placed in the episode order. I'd also like to give, for my episode review of Crisis in the Love Zone, an A, which is a Splatcellent, because I feel that even though it's not quite as mature tonally as Valentine's Day Massacre, it also has a bit of zaniness thrown into the mix now that we're in season 3 and things are really cartoonish with the way the acting is happening for many of the episodes in season 3. And this is the midpoint of season 3, so we really get a well-worn groove of Big Pete and Little Pete's characters by now, and the kind of tropes and quirks that they have through their interactions with other Wellsville characters, particularly Nona, who came into it at the beginning of season 2 of the series. I can't really give it any more points than what I state here, just because I find that the plot really does scatter all over the place and spreads itself just a little bit too thin with all the different characters that's showing up, especially one-time characters, for the sake of this love sickness plot that's going on, started by Eunice. Although I really like Eunice Puel as a one-time mail carrier lady. I kind of wish that I saw her in The Call, or at least one other, to really establish her character and her relationship with the Petes in general. Pit stain, kind of gross in this episode. I don't think I ever want to see a meat sculpture of a girl or a sunburn heart on somebody's prepubescent hairy-ish chest in any kind of kids television. So that's saying a lot for it, why I wouldn't rate it higher. But I enjoy a lot of the subtle moments where Nona's really taking in her relationship with Little Pete and coming into the realization that she really does care for him throughout all the adventures they've had so far over the past season and a half. So I gotta give it an A as well. It's very enjoyable. It has a very sentimental feeling to it. We can all relate to spring fever hitting us at one point in our lives, and it's worth rewatching despite it being a slightly lesser known season 3 episode, especially considering the DVD's never released.
All right. Well, for my ratings for these two episodes, I'm going to start with Crisis in the Love Zone. I felt like with these, both these episodes kind of going in, sort of felt like mid-level-ish Pete and Pete. I think of Valentine's Day Massacre. I think of early Pete and Pete, not fully developed. And then with Crisis in the Love Zone, it kind of gets lost in some of the season 3 stuff that maybe isn't as good as seasons 1 or 2. But for Crisis in Love Zone, after today's discussion, I've moved it up from sort of that Splatbridge to a Splatisfactory, which is a B, because I really loved the points that Alex brought up with Nona being the main character, and it is really a unique episode in that way. And of course it's unique because Little Pete also narrates, but the fact that Nona's being part of this and that she's also part of the main focus, and the fact that also the development of her character where she's willing to say I love you when no one else is, I thought that was really an amazing point that I didn't really put together as well, that Alex brought full-fledged. So I'm super excited he mentioned that, and so because of that I had to move it up. And then as for Valentine's Day Massacre, I think started with Splat's Factory, but as we dive into it and learn to appreciate it a little better, I moved this up to Splatulent, which is an A, and I like Brett's points with the development of Big Pete, but I mean, ultimately, I just found myself really, really loving Open Face and his gang and those bullies, and that's what really kind of put it over the top for me. Also, Mr. Beverly is just a fun one-off character. So, and I do think, as we've talked about it today and where we're at with the series itself, I do think that Valentine's Day Massacre actually is, in a lot of ways very Pete-esque, where, it's definitely really tight in seasons 1 or 2, but this is the building blocks for the series, and you can definitely see it coming through really well in this episode. You can see a lot of the quirkiness with a squid getting hit with a discus is part of that strangeness that the series brings in. And I tend to when I look at Pete and Pete, I look at the 4 pillars that Will McRobb set up, which is that everything had to be funny, beautiful, sad, and strange. And so it's got plenty of strange with the open face sandwich stuff and these weird bullies, and then and the squid thing, and then it's beautiful because it is a love story in a lot of ways, and it's sad that Big Pete didn't really that love for a teacher didn't obviously can't and doesn't become full-fledged, and also too him and Ellen are kind of left in limbo a little bit, so there's that. And of course, it's funny. I laughed a lot of times when I was watching it. I've had a really great time talking with y'all today, and just reminiscing about what was so great about it. So it moves up to that Splatulent category for me. So.
And I'm going to keep mine really short and sweet. So just going to our first episode, the Valentine's Day Massacre. I really liked this. I thought it was a very good initial pilot, because that's pretty much what it was. I don't think the story was as well woven as the later seasons, but it's the pilot. I loved the characters. I loved the bringing out the side characters really, really well. It's a fantastic start. So I give this a rating of A, Splatulent. But when we get to Crisis in the Love Zone for Season 3, they've really perfected this episode, the storytelling, having both Pete's have main storylines and have Nona right in the center of it to interlock those stories. I'm really impressed with this episode. It's some of the better writing and some of the better equal parts for both Pete's. So I put this as an S, up in the S tier for splatterific.
Alrighty, so with that being said, let's run right into our Say What segment.
Say what?
Say what?
Say what?
Say what?
Say
what?
So for Say What, let's test our Pete and Pete trivia with these questions based on our episodes today. And I want to give a quick shout out to Manny, who helped us write this segment. So I don't actually know the answers to these off the top of my head. I would play a few, but I have to actually reveal the answer to you guys. So it's going to be Ali against Alex to see who's the more Pete and Pete fan when it comes to this trivia. So basically how it works is we're going to give you a bunch of questions with quotes, and whoever gets it right first gets the point value. We did a little differently here where we're not doing increased difficulty. We're just doing it 2 points, which is essentially for the person who said it. And then we have a question at the end, which is worth 5 points to help prevent it from being a tie. So starting off with quote number 1, who said it? Yum, there's nothing like a hot liver and gravy sandwich when you're flying a kite.
Oh, I know this.
Allie?
One would think it could be Open Face, but it is Ellen who says this.
It is indeed Ellen. Good job. 2 points, Allie.
There's nothing like a hot liver and gravy sandwich when you're flying a kite.
Question 2, or quote 2. Who said it? Ever seen a deer hit by a car? Alex?
That was Open Face.
That's right. Speaking of the devil, there he is.
Same
2 to 2.
conversation.
Yes, it was.
They were making conversation. I loved it. It's so random.
Ever see a deer get hit by a car?
I love that all of his awful things were trying to be like little moments of
endearing.
Yes.
I'm trying to be nice. Do you want me to murder someone for you to show you my love? He would do it. I know he would.
He would.
Yeah. Quote 3. 2 points. Who said it? My dad is the guy who always wanted to be a discus thrower in the Olympics. Sometimes he sneaks out at night and pretends he's the champion of the world. Allie.
Oh, that's well, Big Pete's the one saying that quote.
That is correct.
Your old daddy.
2 points for Allie.
You see, my dad's this guy who always wanted to be a discus thrower in the Olympics. Sometimes he even sneaks out at night and pretends he's champion of the world.
Quote 4. Drop dead and quit breathing my air. Or I should rephrase that. You drop dead and quit breathing my air.
Now you've given it away.
Alex.
That was Heather.
It was. Oh, man. She's a piece of work.
Drop dead and quit breathing my air.
Quote 5. Who said it? It's Pete. He's got the fever, and he's gone kablonkers. Allie.
That was a Nona.
That was Nona. 2 points for you.
It's Pete. He's got the fever. He's gone kablonkers.
Quote 6. No, I can prove it. Love has changed me. Love is what makes the birds in the morning. Wakes the birds in the morning. Alex.
That was Pit Stain.
That was Pit Stain. 2 points for you.
No, I'll prove it. Love has changed me. Love is what wakes the birds in the morning.
Last question. Has anyone kept score?
We're tied.
I think it's tied.
Okay, it's going to come down to this. This is a tricky one because it's very vague. Stop that! Who said it?
I think I know, but I'll give Allie a shot.
Oh no. I don't know. I'm stumped.
I think it's the same character, but I just forgot which episode it is. But I believe it's Little Pete.
You are correct. It is Little Pete. He says it at the end when Nona's like trying to glomp on him.
I didn't know if it was that scene or if it was the bullies on the Valentine's Day Massacre.
Yeah, that was a tricky one. I'm glad Manny put it in there. But yeah, that's from the end scene of Crisis in the Love Zone. So congratulations, Alex. You reclaimed your title as winner of the Say What segments after that brief dethrone in a previous episode. Good job.
Thank you.
Any final
well done,
thoughts?
Allie.
Yeah, well done.
Oh, yeah.
No slouch.
I had a great time. Final thoughts. I did have one, and I was curious to know, do you find either of these the quintessential love story of the series?
Oh,
I have a different episode in mind.
Yeah, I've got a different one too.
Me three. You want to say it at the same time?
See if we're all thinking it.
1, 2, 3. Time tunnel. Who said what?
What did you say, Allie?
I think The Call is the most beautiful love story of the series.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I forgot. Because
a man who's willing to wait 26 years.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
Oops. Well, I sound like a idiot for mentioning Time Tunnel.
Time Tunnel is very sweet. I appreciate Time Tunnel for so many reasons. But
what was the one that they were where Ellen was the dot?
Yeah, Day of the Dot. That was another.
Day of the Dot.
I love that one, especially at the end when they come together and that sentimental music's playing.
That one almost gets it, but the maturity of the way they handled The Call, it's beautiful.
Yeah, although Time Tunnel's that sweet ending does take the cake in a lot of ways too. Like it's great.
It does. Plus, Endless Mike is in peak performance here. Come on, no fog, no fun. Is
he not in peak?
Come on, get in the car.
He's the most consistent character actor on that show. He's so
he
good.
is.
Yeah.
And quick nod to Open Face using Carrot Top in Valentine's Day Massacre, which later became Endless Mike staple when he referred to Big Pete.
Also, Nona calls Little Pete Carrot Top.
Yeah, go figure.
Yeah, kiss me, Carrot Top.
Real quick before we go, Allie, do you want to share something with us that's Pete and Pete related?
Yeah. It's been said, I have an Instagram account called @Krebstar_Industries where I make ads for Krebstar products in the series. But last year for Valentine's Day, I made what I think are some lovely Pete and Pete Valentines about some of your favorite characters from the show, paired with some infamous lines. And if you go to my Instagram, they're all highlighted on my my highlights, and you can go through, and I've paired them with songs that I think match the essence of the scene, and they're also in the main feed. So go check them out. I had a great time making them, and I know folks liked them when they came out. So print one off or send it DM to one of your favorite friends or love interests, and let them know how you feel in the words of Wellsville.
Yeah, they're so charming. I love all the work that you do, Allie. So thank you for making the Pete and Pete community a better place with your contribution.
Yes. Well, thank you. I'm happy to, and hopefully you have me back for some more Pete and Pete discussion.
Won't be the last time.
I enjoy it every time.
I just want to mention real quick, in addition to the stickers I showed earlier, I did do illustrations for Crisis in the Love Zone and Valentine's Day Massacre a couple years back when I was attempting to draw every Pete and Pete episode. It is very buried in my Instagram by now because that was when I was doing my art thing. But if you want to check that out, I'll just throw it up on the screen right here for each episode so you can see how they compare and my particular interpretation of what I consider the essence to be each episode. So if you have any thoughts on that, let us know in the comments of this YouTube video or on Instagram. All right, Gackoids, let's decontaminate ourselves from spring fever and head on out. But before we do, here's a closing question for you all Slimesters. Which 90s Nick character did you have a crush on as a kid, and maybe still do? Write to us via email at splatattack2021@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram at splatattackpodcast. You could also subscribe to our YouTube channel at splatattackpodcast, or just interact with us wherever you feel necessary on social media. Again, thank you, Allie, so much for being here today. Hope you enjoyed the episode battle and our trip to the suburbs of Pete and Pete's stomping grounds. We already mentioned before, you do Krebstar Industries on Instagram. Guys, if you love Pete and Pete, you have to check out this work. It's truly enjoyable, and it'll hit right home if you love all the stuff that Krebstar puts out.
Also, be sure to check out Allie's other podcasts, Notable Nostalgia and Dungeons and Decades. We will put a link down below.
Tune in next time, Slimesters, when we head into the Roundhouse and watch the Every Family wrestle with a hot-button topic in our episode review of Roundhouse Feminism. It's got dancing, singing, social issues, and a slew of guests returning, along with some new faces joining us for the live audience show. You don't want to miss this once-in-a-life experience here only on Splat Attack. Until then, Alex, will you drain the slime tank for us, please? I've got a date with Miss Fingerwood to paint the football field with love once we paid tribute to Edna the Fighting Squid.
Aye, Co-Captain. Just do one thing for me while you're there.
What's that?
Stay off the line!
Oops. My bad. Ugh, I got paint on my shoes now. Gross. Splash you later, Slimesters.
Bye.
Reprise the theme song and roll the credits.
I reckon it's time for me to go.
I'm glad that's over. Now for a peaceful night's sleep.
Well, that does it for now.
Yeah, we gotta catch a train.
Since I'm going home, you can have my arts and crafts project. It's a tweezer holder.
Alright, guys. Let's go far.
How long have we been away?
See you soon. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
And the birds singing their little chirpity chirp chirp chirpity chirpity chee. It's spring, and that means love is in the air.
I told myself it didn't matter. Once I gave my Valentine to Miss Fingerwood, all my troubles would be over.
It was mail carrier Eunice Puel. She didn't just carry letters in her bag, she carried the fever.
How could you possibly be in love with Miss Fingerwood?